I am excited to be in your presence on today. I'm so thankful for the invitation to be with you all on today. And you are a beautiful congregation, and I am blessed to be here on this morning. I want to give a shout out to Janice and Bob, who were just incredible hosts for me on last evening. I arrived later than usual, and they were there with smiling faces. I walked in, and another sister had a boot on her foot, similar to the one I have on mine. I said, "Oh, twins!" And it was just a great evening, great meal, and a great rest. So again, thank you for your hospitality. And I'm from Houston, Texas. I'm from the South. So I know something about hospitality, and I have experienced that on this weekend, and I am so grateful to be in your presence. Thank you to our worship assistant. Thank you to Shannon, who has been in touch with me for quite a while, getting things together for today. I absolutely love the way you come together and the way you have been able to get me together to be with you on today. So I'm grateful. So I'm supposed to deliver a sermon, but I was told not to do that without offering a selection for you, since it's no secret that I am a singer. So I want to give you a bit of that, and then I'll go into the message. And I'm going to grab my words here. And I say good morning to my nephew Michael, who has made a grand, fashionably late entrance. Good to see you, love. Let there be peace on earth, and let it begin with me. Let there be peace on earth, the peace that was meant to be, with God as creator. Siblings all are we. Let me walk with my brother in perfect harmony. Let peace begin with me, and let it begin with me. Let there be peace on earth, and let it begin with me. Again, I am happy to be with you and to be speaking from the subject, now what? Moving beyond the pledge. Moving beyond the pledge. Have you ever found yourself asking the question, now what? Maybe you've just accomplished a big goal in your life, like graduating from high school or getting a promotion at work, and you're wondering, what's next? Or maybe you are one of those who have experienced a setback or disappointment, and you're not sure of how to move forward. Whatever the case may be, we have all found ourselves at a crossroads wondering, what's next? What do I do next? In the hit TV show Friends, In the episode titled The One Where They All Turn 30, the characters Rachel and Ross and Phoebe are all struggling with the idea of turning 30 and wondering what's next for them in their lives. They each have different expectations and fears about the future, but in the end, they realize that they're all still young and they've got plenty of time to figure things out. This is a relatable example of the what now question that many people ask themselves at various stages in their lives. The now what question is also a common one in social justice movements, particularly after a significant victory or a milestone has been reached. For example, after the passing of the Civil Rights Act in 1964, many activists in the movement were left wondering what the next steps would be to continue fighting for racial justice and equality. This led to the formation of groups like the Black Panther Party and the continuing fight for voting rights, fair housing, and economic justice. This example shows that even when progress is made, there's always more work to be done to ensure that marginalized communities are treated fairly and justly. So after this remarkable pledge to end racism that you all have engaged in, what does moving beyond the pledge look like? What does it entail? How much work is really involved? So as Unitarian Universalists, as spouses, as parents, as children, we know the power of making a pledge to our communities, our values, and ourselves. A solemn promise or agreement to do or refrain from doing something is the definition of a pledge. But sometimes our circumstances change and we need to let go and make room for new commitments. Today, we are exploring this concept of moving beyond the pledge and how we can do so with integrity, with respect, not only for ourselves, but for our communities. And as you know, the history of racism is complex. It's long-standing. It dates back centuries. Racism is rooted in the belief that certain racial or ethnic groups are superior to others. And it has been used to justify exploitation, oppression, and violence towards marginalized communities. And one of the most significant impacts of racism is the creation and the perpetuation of systemic and institutional barriers that prevent marginalized communities from accessing the same opportunities, the same resources that everyone else has. This has resulted in significant disparities in areas such as education, such as employment, such as housing, such as healthcare. Now what? Additionally, racism has a profound impact on individuals and communities. It causes psychological trauma, it causes emotional harm, and it perpetuates a culture of fear, a culture of mistrust, and a culture of division. We want to look at this closer. These disadvantages happen in communities where racism flourishes, where systemic racism flourishes. It can be seen in many aspects of our society, from the criminal justice system to the workplace to political representation and so much more. The effects of racism are far-reaching and they're long-lasting, and it is a pressing issue that requires ongoing education, ongoing self-reflection, and ongoing action. If we're going to address this ugly monster of racism, we've got to get into some action. We've got to do some things. We can't just pray about it and think that it's going to disappear. We can't just sign a pledge and think that it's going to disappear. This is where it gets interesting. This is where we all have to roll up our sleeves, and this is where we all have to come together to make it happen. Wouldn't you agree? We've got to work together. We can't just name it and claim it. No, we've got to get down to work. We've got to put some elbow grease in it, as my granny would say. Put some elbow grease in it. And what you have done by engaging in this pledge is indeed powerful. It's a powerful statement to stand in 2023 and say, we want to dismantle this thing that has been set up from the very beginning to be a deterrent. To be a deterrent to those who are struggling, to be a deterrent to those who are not from the white America that we know and love. We've got to get to work. There is power in our pledge, and it can be a powerful and meaningful way to commit ourselves to the goal and to commit ourselves to the value. Perhaps you've made a pledge to your community to volunteer your time. Maybe you have been able to prioritize what you do in your community in order to accomplish what you set out to do. The pledge gives us a sense of purpose and a sense of direction. Pledges can help us stay accountable to ourselves and to others. How many know that some of us don't like to be held accountable? Some of us don't like to be called on our stuff, as we would say in my house. You don't want to be called on it. But this is what a pledge does. It helps. It's a reminder. It's a motivator. It reminds us of our goals. It reminds us of our values. And there are a variety of contexts in which you can make a pledge. You can make a pledge to yourself that would include personal goals. You can, just as you have done, signed a pledge for social justice initiatives, for community building efforts. We may say to ourselves, I pledge to treat myself to self-care. I pledge to take care of myself. I pledge to eat better. I pledge to treat my spouse better. I pledge to listen to my children. All these pledges that we make require some work on our behalf, but it is a moment of power when we are able to do so. The act of making this pledge can be particularly powerful in the context of social justice. In this context, pledges can serve as a way for individuals to publicly commit to supporting a specific cause or taking action to address a particular issue. This can be a powerful way to build momentum and support for social justice efforts as individuals come together around a shared set of goals and a shared set of value. We talked about accountability, and pledges do just that. They help us hold ourselves accountable and hold others we are walking this journey with accountable. By making these public statements that include your intentions, individuals are more likely to follow through on their commitment. Because listen, I made this pledge and everybody knows I made this pledge, so I better get it together. I better act accordingly in order to keep a good face, showing good faith as you're able to hold on to those pledges. The act of committing oneself to a specific course of action, and a set of values. They're powerful motivators. They're reminders. So when you see the many forms of racism at work, such as structural racism, where a city government implements zoning policies that restrict low-income housing to certain neighborhoods, which results in a concentration of poverty and limited access to resources and opportunities. This is structural racism. This policy has a disproportionate impact on communities of color, perpetuating racial disparities, and it limits opportunity. And then you have institutional racism. A university that consistently fails to recruit and retain faculty and staff of color, leading to a lack of diversity and representation within the institution. This can result in a lack of cultural competency, a lack of understanding among students and staff, and a lack of support for students of color. I am a huge sports fan. Basketball, football, tennis, you're probably going to have ESPN on a TV in my house, probably always. And as I listen to some of the pundits, they are also calling out racism in the fact of not many sports teams, especially in the National Football League, have Black coaches. There's this Rudy rule that I think it's called the Rudy rule, that they have to at least interview someone of color as they are preparing to hire a new coach. And here you have a great percentage of athletes in the NFL are Black. There's no way to overlook that. All of these players, but they don't have a Black coach or someone that they can relate to. They're not given an opportunity. This is institutional racism at its finest. And wouldn't you agree that as Americans, we have really gotten it together as it relates to finding ways to keep people out, finding ways to discriminate against them. This form of racism always is a problem. Interpersonal racism. Interpersonal racism is where a person who uses racial slurs or someone that's making racist jokes, they perpetuate negative stereotypes and promote a culture of hatred and discrimination. This type of behavior can contribute to a hostile and unwelcoming environment for people of color. And it can contribute to feelings of marginalization and exclusion. These are just a few examples of racism, and they take on a life form of their own. Now what? If I were in the African American Baptist church, the pastor would say, look at your neighbor and say, now what? This is one of those moments. Look at your neighbor and say, now what? Now what? What are we going to do about this ugly disease called racism? What are we going to do? Well, I got some steps here that can kind of help us along as we move beyond making the pledge. Number one, we've got to educate ourselves. One of the most important steps you can take is to educate yourself about racism and its impact on individuals and communities. This may involve reading books and articles, attending workshops and webinars, and engaging in discussions with others about their experiences and their perspectives. We've got to not only get educated, but we've got to listen to and support communities of color. It is also important to listen and to support persons who are disproportionately affected. This means How can we raise their voices? How can we amplify their voices? How can we support their businesses and their organizations and advocating for policies and practices that advance their interest and their well-being? See, this is where we get to speak up and speak out against racism, whether it's in conversations with friends and family, on social media, or in a public setting. It's important to speak out against racism and to challenge these attitudes, challenge these behaviors when you encounter them. Not get in your car and talk about it on the way home to say, well, so-and-so was awfully rude, or that was so ugly how they dealt with that. No, instead of waiting till you get in your car, you say, excuse me, brother, excuse me, sister, I take offense in what you said. And think how this makes a person of color feel. Think how this makes women feel. Think how this makes the LGBTQ community feel. How does it make them feel when you just let it pass, you let it slide? These are things that we have to do. We have to combat those things. We can't just let it pass, because if we let it pass, then the problem festers. The problem just continues and it goes on and on and on. So not only do we educate ourselves, we speak out. We take action. In addition to speaking out, it's important to take concrete action to address racism in your own life, in your own community. This may involve volunteering with organizations that are working to end racism. This would mean supporting anti-racist policies and anti-racist candidates, and advocating for change within your workplace or in your community. Yeah, this is the time where you get to step out there. You get to speak truth to power. And you have to realize that sometimes when this happens, people are going to stop talking to you. People are going to close their door to you. They're not going to answer your phone calls. But see, this is a step that we take when we want to create change. We've got to be the one to stand up and do it. How else can change happen unless we make it happen? We can't just talk about it. We've got to get involved. Yeah, you got to put your own skin on the line. And then we get to reflect and we get to evaluate. We have to regularly reflect on our own biases. Yes, we all have these biases, but we have to check ourselves. We have to check our actions. And it gives us an opportunity to evaluate and to reevaluate whether we are living up to the commitment to end racism. Are we living up to our pledge? Are we doing what needs to be done? Are we doing the dirty work? Because this is not a clean thing that we do. This is dirty work. Notice the roll up your sleeves, put the elbow grease in it, do something about it. This is an action that we must take beyond signing the pledge, beyond saying, I'm going to do better, beyond me saying, I'm going to lose weight and don't do nothing about it. It's not going to happen. I've got to put in the work. I've got to walk around the block, take the dog for a walk. I've got to do something. I've got to get involved, and I've got to be held accountable. If I don't do something I say I'm going to do, certainly there are several people in my life to say, miss, you said you were going to do this, but you've not done it. So it's a way to be held accountable. We've got to reflect and evaluate. What have I done this week to dismantle racism? What have I said? Have I engaged in enough conversation? Have I spoken truth to power in instances where racism has been prevalent, or we've seen something in our lives? We've got to be able to reflect, reevaluate. We've got to seek feedback from others. We've got to do this self-reflection, and we've got to make adjustments as needed to ensure that we are contributing to the fight against racism in a meaningful way. So, Ending racism is a complex and ongoing process that requires individual action and it requires collective action. By educating yourself, by listening to and supporting communities of color, by speaking out, by taking action, regularly evaluating. If we do these things, we are able to create a more just and equitable world for all. And sometimes when we make pledges, we find that we may have outgrown them or our circumstances have changed. So in that regard, then you're going to have to know when it's a good time to shift, know when it's a good time to add on to this pledge, another time to move forward. This can be a difficult thing to come by, but it's important to listen to that inner voice. Know when it's time to move on. Know when it's time to let go. Maybe you've been volunteering for an organization for years, but your interests have shifted and you feel like, oh, I'm getting a little burnout on this. Maybe you've been working towards a particular goal, but the external factors have made that goal no longer feasible. It's okay to recognize when it's time to move on and to make space for new commitments that align with your values and with your interest. As individuals and communities grow and change, it's natural for the goals and values to change. It may mean you have outgrown what you started, and so it's time to shift. In order to do that, you may need to look at your values, reassess them. What are our priorities now? Maybe they have changed. You have got to shift and reassess. This could be involved with reflecting on your personal growth. What are the community needs? What is the larger context in which you're operating? What needs to happen in your community? By taking a step back and looking at these things again, you can begin to identify where the pledge may no longer hold its value, and you may need to tweak it a bit. Reassess. Create new pledges and commitments based on your reassessment and your identification of areas of growth and change. Engage in ongoing reflection. Shift and grow because it's a part of the process. And it's important to engage in ongoing reflection as you move forward. Build community and support. It's important to build this support as you grow and as you shift. This may look like connecting with other organizations, seeking mentorship and seeking guidance in how to make this thing happen and how to make it work. Shifting as we have outgrown our current situation calls us to reassess our values, reassess our priorities. And by taking these steps, you can assure that you will continually grow in the process. When we move beyond the pledge, it can be a scary thing to talk and embrace something new. Change is never that cut and dry. There's always some pull, some give and take, some refusing to let go, some refusing to do things differently, but you have to be able to do that in order to embrace something new. The newness also becomes an exciting factor. That's something that excites, and it also transforms. After all, we want to be different. We want to be better than we once were. So, if you're feeling drawn to a new cause or a new organization or take on a new challenge that aligns with your values, don't be afraid. Embrace it. Embracing new commitments can be a way to continue to live out the values and make a difference in the world. And if you're going to embrace new commitments, you've got to understand the commitment that you're making. It's important to understand what it's going to take. It's going to take some time and some research. It's going to take some reflection, some commitment. Think about what it's going to take. Make a plan. Once you understand the commitment, make the plan for how you're going to implement this new commitment. Gather support. Embracing a new commitment can be difficult. It's important to have a support system in place. It looks like you all have a beautiful community to support one another in the work. Support each other. Join in with each other. Take baby steps. It's not going to happen overnight. You've got to take baby steps. Embracing a new commitment can be overwhelming. So you got to take small steps, focus on the small changes, and build momentum over time. And by all means, stay accountable. Hold yourself accountable and hold your community accountable as well. You've got to be able to track your progress. You've got to ask for feedback. You can't be afraid for somebody to say, well, you could have done that a little better. Don't be afraid. It's going to transform you into just the type of individual and organization that you are working on. By understanding our commitment, making a plan, getting support, taking the small steps, you can successfully embrace this idea and make meaningful change. When you set your mind to moving beyond the pledge, you've got to have integrity and respect for the communities and their values. You've got to communicate with others about what your decisions are, what you're finding. You've got to talk about how you can honor your commitments. So, as we move beyond the pledge, it can be difficult, but it is necessary. It's part of personal growth and development. And by recognizing when it's time to move forward and embrace the newness, you can continue to live out the values of the pledge. As civil rights leader John Lewis said, and we talked about this quote earlier, freedom is not a state, it's an act. Being free is a state, it's an act. Continue to act towards a more just and equitable world. Be willing to let go of the old and embrace the new. John Lewis understood the importance of letting go of old commitments and making room for new ones. He believed that progress requires us to continually reevaluate our goals, reevaluate our strategies, and be willing to adapt and evolve in the face of changing circumstances. In the latter years of Lewis's life, he continued to fight for justice and equality. But he also began to focus on passing the torch to a new generation of activists, a new generation of leaders. He recognized that the fight for justice is ongoing, and that requires constant willingness to let go of the old and embrace the new. Constant willingness. It's a constant act. I was sharing with the sister this morning how little background. My best friend is white. We've known each other almost 40 years. And we have just within the last several to begin to talk about, wait a minute, girl, you're white and I'm black. So what is that, with all of the tension that has been going on in the world of late, we have found a space to really talk. And so she knows more now about how to be an ally than anything ever, because she's doing the work. We're doing the work. You know, and the thing that struck me so much is in our talking, she's like, well, you can't help me be anti-racist. I've got to go to my white sisters and white brothers, and they're the ones that we're going to have to gather and talk about. Because she realized the fact that trauma plays a great role in a person that's being marginalized. There is trauma. It does something to the person. It does something to the psyche, if you will, to have to deal with racism and then explain how for people not to be racist. It's a work that we all have to do. African American communities have to do this work together. White communities have to do this work together, you know, and LGBTQ individuals have to do the work amongst the LGBTQ community and then begin to branch out to others, to be able to understand where we're coming from and where we're going. It's important that you do the work. So freedom is not a state, it is an act. It's a continuous act that we all must take. Freedom is not an abstract concept, but it requires continuous action and continuous commitment. It also speaks to the idea that every generation must do its part to create a better world. And that sometimes this requires letting go of that old thinking that we've had, letting go. How can we embody this message? How can we begin to continue? How can we begin to continue the process? We've got to be in communication. We've got to link up with other individuals. It's a work that we must do. So ask yourself, now what? What do we do now? What can we do differently that we've not done before? How can we make a difference in this humongous world that we live in? We are a part of the change. We are a part of the progress. We are a part of the solution. We can do this. And I commend you all for the work that you have done, the work that you have started, the work that's going to continue. Because I'm sure there are going to be things that you can do, things that you can take on each and every day and be able to make your voice heard. Because you're working together. Because you're thinking about ways in which to make the world a better place. So, I ask you again, now what? Now what? Thank you.